Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the session, and Linda will be glad to answer some of your questions. So we don't want to take your entire evening, so we are aiming to finish around 7:30. So we'll try to be prompt as much as we can. Alrighty, so let me tell you a bit about Linda. So Linda's experience spans more than 20 years in the financial industry, where she specialized in pension funds and investment management. And I mean, she joined Eskom Pension Fund in Provident as its chief executive and principal office in September 2019, having previously served as the fund's chief investment officer from 2010 to 2013. And I mean, during her tenure as CIO, she was instrumental in the development of the EPPF's BBBE policy, which spearheaded many transformation initiatives in the asset management industry. And I mean, prior to joining the EPPF in 2019, Linda served as the head of investments and actuarial services at the Government Employees Pension Fund from 2015 to 2019. She holds a master's degree in finance and investments from the University of Witwatersrand, and she's a fellow of the Africa Leadership Initiative, South Africa, and a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. Linda is the vice chairperson of the board of directors of Mthatha Council for the Retirement Funds and the chairperson of the investment committee of the University of Johannesburg Council. Linda, welcome and thank you for accepting to chat to us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I mean, it's exciting to have this chat with you. And, we're going to learn more about you and what you do and where you come from. So let me get started. You started school at the age of 4 years old and you matriculated at the age of 15. From the village school in Qumbu to the Saints, you know, St. Anne's. And I would say, you know, we've got a very smart lady in the room. Tell us about that and your upbringing.
My starting school at the age of 4 was pure accident. So if I can tell you a little bit about that, I lived with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, until the age of 8. And for various reasons, my parents couldn't live together. They were not in the same town. And so the safest place for me to be was at my grandmother's, which was in a village called Balasi, Qumbu, in the Eastern Cape, which was then known as the Transkei. And my grandmother was a school teacher. She was a teacher for sub A, which is now known as grade 1. In the in the 70s, I think it was still known as sub A. And pure accident. At one point, because she was a teacher, she had a childminder who would look after me during the day. And the childminder had to go away for a few days. So I was left without anyone to look after me. And my grandmother made the decision to put me in a pram and go off to school, to her classroom with me. She put me at the back of the classroom in my pram and soon realized that I was learning something and getting quite excited about what all the other kids were doing. They were learning to recite numbers or the alphabet or whatever they were doing. And by the 3rd day, I was literally begging to go back to school with her. And so I think it was just a casual experiment on her part at the time. She put me in the class and I ended up joining the class. But I must qualify this because people go on about, oh, you're a genius. And no, this was Transkei in the 1970s. And anyone from there who's in the audience right now might identify with this. If you put your head, if you put your arm over your head and your hand can reach your ear, you are old enough to start school, right? And that was the test. That was your entrance test. So maybe genetic luck intervened on my behalf, and I ended up starting school. Of course, genetic luck plus my grandmother being a teacher. I started school at the age of 4. That happened to be the year in which she retired from teaching because she was 60 years old at the time. But I was so into school and the routine of it that I continued even after her retirement. And so it came to be that I started school at a very young age and eventually matriculated at the age of 15. But by then I had been through all kinds of schooling. You know, the experience with my grandmother was in a village, Qumbu. It was mud floor. We used to write on slates. We didn't have books, we wrote on slates. I don't know if you even know what a slate is, Prudence. Okay, ask somebody a bit older than you.
And I wasn't born at that time.
Yes, I figured that. So it was a different time, and I guess the standards that apply now didn't as much, because my daughters right now couldn't start school until the year in which they were turning 7. It's a requirement. And there are very good reasons for that, but the time and the era we were in actually allowed me to start school and participate in the process before the time that officially I should have been ready for. But I guess I kept up. Intellectually, I think I kept up until my matric year. What was really difficult was socially, I think, when I got to high school at St. Anne's. My daughter's here, so please, just excuse me. Stand up, come here.
Hi.
Hello.
This is Luce.
Hi, Luce.
This is Kanya.
Hello, Kanya.
How old are you? You 5?
Wow,
Okay.
you're a big girl.
So
Linda,
please,
there's
darling.
bad feedback. So I think.
Now go. I'm in a very serious meeting right now. Close the door. Sorry, these are the joys of working from home, right? These are the joys of lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, what I was trying to say was I've been through all kinds of schooling systems in South Africa. I've been from the very basic and rural environment. When I eventually moved to Mthatha to live with my parents, I was 9 years old, and that was in a multiracial school, and for the first time. Because prior to that, we were learning everything in isiXhosa. So biology was taught in Xhosa, English was taught in Xhosa, maths was taught in Xhosa. And then I went to this very urban school in Mthatha, which was multiracial. And then from there, I went to a very exclusive boarding school in KZN called St. Anne's, and that's where I matriculated eventually. So anyway, the point I'm making in all of this is that it all began by pure accident.
Oh wow, who would have thought that accidents can, be a bliss in your life?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what were the most important lessons that you learned as a child that you feel helped you shape your career?
They were not immediately clear at the time, but looking back now, I can see what they were. I think as a child, first of all, I learned from my grandmother. My grandmother actually was a single parent to my mother, and she raised about 6 children of her siblings, and from being a toddler to an adult. And she was just an amazing woman in that in those times, women couldn't own land if they were on their own. They needed a husband or a son to actually own the space that they lived in. But she somehow managed to work her way around that system and got to own her own little plot of land and she built a house on it. She had a garden going on. Eventually she was farming cattle, she was farming chickens, while at the same time being a teacher until her later years. So I think what I learned from there was that a woman can do anything, really. There are no natural limitations to what a woman can do. But I only recognize that, of course, with the benefit of hindsight and with the benefit of being an adult. I think another thing I learned, and this was from my father's family. My maiden name is Soga, and the Soga family were pioneers in a lot of ways in the intellectual history of the Eastern Cape. The very first Black medical doctor in South Africa was a Soga. The very first veterinarian, the vet of any race actually, who was South African, was a Soga. First Black editor of a newspaper was a Soga. And so I think all of those culminated in me, and of course a lot happened in between then. We're talking about the 1800s, and then colonialism, apartheid, Group Areas Act, et cetera, happened, which got in the way of their, I suppose, expressing their full potential, got in the way. But
Yeah.
the lessons that I took from that was that there are no limits. You can be anything you want to be.
That's absolutely amazing. So you've got some good genes there.
Yeah, I suppose so. Huh?
Yeah, so I mean, Linda, your educational background as well is impressive. You went from psychology to finance. Talk to us about that. That's like 180 degrees turn, you know? And I know there are many young women out there who want to better themselves and who aren't sure what to study. Do you have any advice for them based on your personal decisions?
So I think what I need to say is that I started off really wanting to become a psychologist. That was my passion. And I took on my BA. I studied psychology as well as anthropology, which is the study of societies and how human beings live, including prehistoric kind of stuff. And even today, I'm still very curious about that kind of thing. So at the time, I was pursuing a passion, right? And I was fortunate enough to have parents who allowed me to do that. And while they were not well off, they applied their resources to allow me the space to do that. And it was only in my second or third year, actually in my second year of the BA studies, that I took on economics as an elective, just as an extra subject, and realized that I was far more intrigued in it and was a lot more curious in that line of finance, economics, accounting even, than I was in the prospect of graduating and then going on to qualify as a psychologist. It was still interesting to me, and I think maybe what needed to happen was that because I had matriculated so young, I needed to learn a little bit about the world. And those years of studying in the arts and in the human sciences gave me the opportunity to appreciate history, to appreciate society, to appreciate the human mind, to appreciate philosophy and human endeavor. Before I then made the decision that I was actually going to leave that field and go on to study finance and economics. And fortunately, because I had started school so early and finished so early, I wasn't behind my peers when I started my second degree, which was then a BCom in finance and economics. And that did take me another 3 years. So I basically spent 6 years studying towards 2 junior degrees at university, but I would say it was worth it. And I say it on two fronts. One is that even though I ended up not practicing psychology, I apply a lot of that knowledge in my everyday work, in my relationships with people that report to me in the workplace, and in my personal life as well. And also, a while back, in the year that I turned 30, which was about 14 years ago, I kind of started to ask myself a lot of questions about, is this where I really want to be? Is this the career I was supposed to pursue? And actually, if my initial pull was towards psychology, did I make a mistake in going towards finance, economics, and finance, economics, and investments? And what I did with that was I decided I would train as a counselor. So I joined an organization called Lifeline, and Lifeline primarily operates as a hotline for people who need to talk to a counselor or are undergoing a particularly tough period in their lives. And I qualified as a Lifeline counselor. And I practiced as a counselor for a few years until my daughter was born. My first daughter was born in 2012. And then I just found I didn't have the time to spend time at Lifeline, manning the phones, etc. But it gave me that satisfaction of saying, in my day job, I do investments, I do finance, I do this. But in my other life, I also fulfill that need that initially drew me towards psychology and counseling and the human sciences. So I do feel like none of it was in vain, and all of it has culminated in making me the person I am today. That was a very long answer, but to your question, the question you asked was for young people who can't decide what it is they want to do and which direction they'd like to go in their careers. I would like to just say something, and maybe it's not the usual advice you would expect from a mentor or an experienced person, is that all your experiences matter. If you're pursuing your passion, if you're pursuing the things that are meaningful to you, at some point it all comes together.
Yeah, just like small pieces of puzzle.
And sometimes it takes 10 years, and sometimes it happens earlier for some people. And I admire those people for whom it came together quite early in life, and they were very clear, for example, that I want to be a doctor. They trained to become a doctor, and they're still a doctor today. I admire those people, but I think for some of us, it just takes a while for all the pieces to come together. But when they do, it makes perfect sense. So I would say to young people, don't pressure yourself into fitting into a particular lane. Explore. If you have the luxury of time, by all means explore, and there are various ways to explore. I mean, I explored my passion for psychology as a volunteer counselor, right? It never became my profession, but I was able to fulfill that need through that avenue.
That's absolutely amazing. So when we out of Valley, psychologist on one hand and a financial services sector leader, but that's great, and I mean it's admirable as well. So Linda, in this month of Women's Month, in particular, as a woman in leadership, what does Women's Month and Women's Day mean to you?
I have such mixed emotions about Women's Month, Prudence. Firstly, I have a deep sense of appreciation and acknowledgement for the women who marched to Parliament from all corners of this country, to the union buildings, not to Parliament, back in the 1950s in rebelling against the pass laws, the oppressive pass laws of the time. it took immense courage for them to do that. The regime of the time was brutal. They could have actually sacrificed their lives in doing that, but they were willing to do it. So I have a very deep appreciation, and I appreciate that we recognize them every year in Women's Month. At the same time, I feel that we somehow sanitize or prettify Women's Month by making it about flower specials and spa dates and all things pink and bright and beautiful. And in doing that, we lose the essence of what it was all about. So I'm very glad and inspired when organizations like ABSIP choose to make it meaningful, choose to make it a proper dialogue about the issues of the day, as opposed to just a fluffy pink and white, let's just, have fun kind of occasion, because it's so much deeper than that. People were willing to give their lives for the rights that we enjoy today as women. And so Women's Month always leaves me with mixed feelings, I suppose. It leaves me with an immense sense of appreciation and pride, but it also leaves me feeling a little bit empty about what we've made the day to be.
Yeah, absolutely true. So have you personally been confronted by the glass ceiling, and what is your advice to women who feel that their prospects are constrained in an industry that is arguably still largely male-dominated?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I need to be very honest here and say that, by the way, how can you see me very well? Because there's a window behind me, there's a bookshelf, so I don't know if the light is permitting you to see me very clearly.
No, I can see you clearly.
Okay, thank you so much. You're asking about the glass ceiling. My experience of the glass ceiling has been in the private sector mostly. In my career, I've spent the greater amount of time in government or state-owned or quasi-government type of organizations. And I find there that the transformation agenda has been a lot more urgent. And so issues of racial or gender inclusion and issues of transformation and equity have been taken a lot more seriously. Actually, going back to the 90s, they already started grappling with that. And it's common cause right now that you can have a woman in a serious position, in a leadership position in the public sector. But in the private sector, on the other hand, I just find that there's still a lot of that pale male syndrome, where the people in the positions of authority are white and male, and everyone else is kind of trying to fit in within that power structure. So for myself personally, and I don't think this is the experience of everyone necessarily, but for myself personally, I have seen the glass ceiling in the times when I worked in the private sector. I have seen that this is as far as I'm going to go and no further, because nobody here wants to see me go any further. Nobody here is interested in investing in me growing any further. And also, actually, very importantly, there's no role model that I can look to who is already on the board or is on the exco in a meaningful way, or in a senior and meaningful position. So I think eventually I found my niche in the likes of the GEPF, the EPPF, the sort of quasi-public sector entities, because there, race does not need to be explained. It's common cause. You're there on merit, and you don't ever have that issue of, because I'm Black, I need to do something extra, or because I'm a woman, actually, you see people like you reflected above you. And that somehow just gives you the assurance that you're going to be okay and you can progress in your career to the limit of your own abilities without extraneous factors getting in your way. But unfortunately, what I've seen, and I'm not saying, once again, I must emphasize, I'm not saying this is the experience of everyone. What I've seen in the private sector is that there is a glass ceiling, that beyond a certain point, you don't see anyone who looks like you or I've now disconnected you from my phone and we're back on my computer. Can you see me and hear me?
Yes, I can see you and hear you.
I'm very, very sorry, and sorry to everybody. I don't know what happened there. Maybe it was Eskom.
Bad joke. No, it's fine. I think we can carry on. Let's not eat more of people's time. There's a couple of questions that came in, but let me just ask you a few more questions and then we can go into the Q&A.
Sure.
All right, so can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing now and what your future plans are? I mean, are we expecting any great things? And, you know, we would love a little bit of a sneak peek.
Yeah. Well, so now I am the Chief Executive and Principal Officer of the Eskom Pension Fund. And I think the reality that we're facing is that we have a dwindling membership base as Eskom puts in place its plans to reduce its workforce and become more efficient. And also we are seeing the older workforce of Eskom being offered voluntary separation agreements, right? Basically being encouraged to retire early. And so this all means that we have fewer and fewer members in the fund. And invariably what that means is that the cost of administering the fund and managing the fund goes up for those who remain in the pension fund. So what we're trying to do now is to find solutions to that, because, you know, costs matter, especially in an environment where the investment returns are not great, as we faced in this low return environment that we've been in for about 5 years. So what we're trying to do is investigate one of two things. The first is, can we remain with the current base of members that we have who are employed by Eskom and are retirees of Eskom and offer different products and services to them? Or can we, given what we do currently, which is to administer funds, pension fund benefits, and to manage investments, can we possibly attract other pension funds to become our clients so that we diversify away from the reliance on Eskom? And we are in that process strategically of figuring out what our future is in the next 5 years. In the next 5 years, it's very likely we will have more pensioners than active members. So we're grappling with those kind of scenarios, which are very real to us, and devising plans around that. But what I would like to do in my time at Eskom Pension Fund is to see to the fund becoming a benchmark, the fund becoming the gold standard of how pension funds should be managed. I want us to become a lot more efficient, a lot more responsive to our members and pensioners, a lot more centered on the needs of our members and pensioners, and offering them excellent service. So, you know, when somebody goes on retirement, sometimes it takes more than a month for their pension benefit to kick in. And let's face it, not many people can afford to go for a month without an income. So what is it in our processes that holds us up from being to immediately be able to pay a pension to someone who retired last month? So those are the kind of things that I think before we even get into what can we potentially offer the market, or what additional products can we offer? It's how good are we at the things we do right now? So we're benchmarking, we're improving efficiencies, and that's what I would like to see happen in my tenure at the Eskom Pension and Provident Fund. Beyond that, I guess I want to still make an active contribution to the industry. And I see so many questions popping up here. So I don't want to spend a lot of time answering this one in particular. But I think there are a lot of exciting changes coming up for us in the retirement industry landscape. And I want to be part of that. And I want to be part of spearheading the changes in that space. Probably beyond the EPPF, I'm in my mid-40s now. So in about 10 years' time, I see myself playing very different roles. I see myself playing roles that are an integration of everything I've done to date. So I see myself probably serving on the boards of a number of pension funds. I see myself coaching and mentoring, which interestingly brings in that psychology element that I left behind a few years ago. And I see myself doing a lot more community building and philanthropic kind of work. So those are the big plans in a way.
That's lovely to hear. And I mean, within your investment strategies that you're planning at this point in time, do you think that COVID-19 has altered those investment strategies in any way? Assuming that you had those strategies before COVID started.
Yeah. Well, what we've always tried to do as EPPF is to manage our assets in relation to our liabilities. So we are one of the last few defined benefit funds remaining in South Africa. Many funds converted to defined contribution. So because we're defined benefit, we in essence have made a promise to our members that we're going to pay their pensions into the future and look after their beneficiaries. So our investment strategy has to be aligned to that. So a lot of the work we do is based on asset liability management principles. And it's also in recognition that in as much as we're a defined benefit fund, our principal employer, being Eskom, might not be in a position to step in if the fund should need a top-up, if the fund should go into a deficit and need the principal employer to step in. So we're very cognizant of that, and I think our investment strategy is designed with that in mind. And so COVID, what COVID has done is introduce a lot of volatility into our portfolio. And what we've done is to kind of question the assumptions we made in our last asset liability model to say, well, do the economic assumptions still hold? Do the asset class performance assumptions still hold? And we've gone back and we've reviewed those. And fundamentally, not a lot has changed. I think the shift is probably more towards preserving the capital we have rather than growing it. Because growing it is challenging at these times, but we absolutely have to preserve what we have. The COVID crisis has also presented opportunities for us to buy assets that we've wanted for a long time at very attractive valuations. So that's another thing that we've done. I think though, beyond that, we have had to be quite mindful of the real impact that this crisis is having on our members and our pensioners in particular, because the average pensioner of the EPPF earns something like, I think it's 5,000 Rand or something like that. And so the board of the fund considered whether we could afford, while maintaining our funding ratio and all of those things, could we afford perhaps to give some relief to our pensioners? So in the past month, we have actually paid a special bonus to our members, where the bonus ranges from 3,500 Rand to 5,500 Rand, depending on the household income. So we basically applied a scale to it where the lowest income households will receive a higher bonus because those are the ones that need the most relief. But the total cost of the whole exercise was 104 million Rand. But to each household, it meant an additional income of 3,000 to 5,000 Rand, which makes a real difference when you consider the base that our pensioners earn, and you consider the cost of healthcare, the cost of actually buying nutritional food, you know, and having fresh fruit and vegetables, and being able to afford all those nutritional supplements that we all need now that we are all so mindful of our health. So it was very well received. It's something we put in place that I think our members and our pensioners really appreciated. It's not something we probably can repeat anytime soon, but it's something that made a huge difference to our members.
All right, that's great to hear and know. Hopefully one day Eskom can come up with new strategies to not give us load shedding. But yeah, that's another story for another day. So Linda, just one last one before we move on to the Q&A session. So as the CEO of Eskom EPPF, how do you think that you can influence transformation in the companies that the fund invests in?
Well, EPPF put some measures in place. We were among the first of the pension funds to put in place a BEE policy in relation to the selection of our asset managers. And also among the first to implement an incubation program. I can't take credit for all of that because some of it happened before my time there. But it's something that I feel quite strongly about, that sometimes you have very talented teams who, on their own, having stepped away from wherever they worked in the mainstream asset management industry, just need someone to be their first investor and someone to afford them a chance before they've achieved a 3-year track record. Because what you're going to hear from a lot of pension funds is, we can't be your first investor. We can't allocate funds to you until you have a 3-year track record. We can't allocate funds to you until you've raised, I don't know, 500 million Rand. So we've recognized that need, and we've set aside some funds to address the need for emerging Black asset managers, and also emerging women-owned and women-led asset managers. In addition to that, in our stockbroking program, we don't do a lot of stockbroking because, maybe if I can just explain a tiny bit about the EPPF, some of our assets are managed in-house. We have portfolio management teams in-house that manage the money market, fixed income, and also some of our passive core equity portfolios. So that's managed in-house. But we don't do a lot of trading then as a result of the investment strategies of those portfolios. But where we can, our intention is always to empower the smaller stockbroking companies, the Black-owned, Black-managed, and in particular the women-owned and women-managed assets stockbrokers. But you'll notice there are not many that are women-owned and women-managed. I think your most recent guest was Babalwa at Scenario Securities, and they are a trailblazer in that space. And it's a very contested space. Stockbroking, everyone is about keeping the margins low. It's tough. It's tough. So, to the extent that we can, we try to make sure that we are allocating to those stockbrokers, we are allocating to those asset managers, but also recognizing not every Black asset manager is an incubation candidate. Some of them are really well established and they can compete among the best. I don't want to name names, but some of our Black asset managers have been awarded Raging Bull Awards. They are recognized in the major surveys. They are, you know, able to compete with the mainstream asset managers. And so we have targets that we've set to allocate in particular to Black-owned, Black-managed, and women-owned and women-managed asset management companies and stockbroking companies.
Absolutely. All right, so Linda, I'm just going to go to the Q&A sessions, and there's quite a number of questions here, but some of them are quite similar in one way or the other. So the first question is from Anonymous. Have you had more male or female sponsors and mentors on your journey? Why do you think that is?
I've been hugely supported by women in my journey. And I would actually say women have been my biggest sponsors. I often listen to this discourse about the pull her down syndrome, and I think there's a lot of myth involved in it because the patriarchy wants us to believe that we are competing amongst each other because there's limited space at the table. So there's room for one woman or two maximum, and so the two of you are competing. And I just have a belief that there's room for so many more. So I've been fortunate enough to have been mentored by women who believed in me and who also were willing to open doors for me. And I think in my own personal journey, to the extent that I've been in leadership positions, it's been a particular focus of mine to make sure that where I can, I'm opening doors for women, I'm empowering women. And I think, you know, a lot of the people that have reported to me in the past can attest to that I've afforded opportunities to them, while by no means implying that I'm a perfect leader, but I've found a lot more support from women. But there are those occasions where actually you need a male to put in a good word for you. So in as much as I think women have been huge backers of my journey so far in my career, there have been those times when you just need to have a conversation with a brother or a father figure and say to them, I'm struggling here. What can you say to those people to kind of shift things for me? Unfortunately, the world is still structured in that way. And sometimes all it takes is a conversation between 2 or 3 men. And to the extent that you have a backer who belongs in that world, it makes a big, big difference. If somebody can say something in your favor who is influential. But yes, as I say, Prudence, largely I found women to be my biggest mentors and backers.
All right, so it's a bit of both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so there's another question from Teboho Musweu. Hi, Linda, can you please let us know your views on how Reg 28 can be amended to catalyze economic recovery and contribute to the country's developmental agenda without having a negative impact on member returns?
Yeah. The interesting thing here is that Reg 28 does allow pension funds to invest in infrastructure, in unlisted assets. It does, as it stands currently. It actually doesn't need amendment. But I think what's happening is that not many funds have actually allocated and dispersed funds into the real economy or into unlisted assets. And so that's where the noise is coming from about we need to amend Regulation 28 because certain things are not happening. But pension funds need a nudge in that direction. If we are to shift the thinking, perhaps Regulation 28 needs to have, in as much as it has maximum levels, maybe it needs to have some minimum levels of what is the minimum that every pension fund should allocate to infrastructure or to real assets in order for us to grow the economy. And maybe that's the discussion that needs to be had, but that's probably somewhat of a controversial view because a lot of our colleagues see that as an open door to prescribed assets. But one does have to ask the question that Regulation 28 has allowed us to invest in unlisted, in infrastructure, in private equity. Why haven't we done it? So if what it's going to take is legislation, perhaps then there is a need to prescribe a minimum level. Even if it's 1% of every pension fund that must be invested in employment creating industries or in infrastructure, I think that would take us some ways forward.
Absolutely. There's another question from Oleboheng Matibe. Hi, Linda.
She's not allowed to ask questions. Okay, go ahead.
She's asking, given the drive to reduce the number of retirement funds, do you think that the rise in emerging Black managers will continue? What's your view on their sustainability?
Oh, okay. I think we could do with some consolidation where some of the asset managers could perhaps reach agreement to combine forces and create a powerhouse, a larger entity that can possibly have greater economies of scale and can attract bigger assets. But I think we're still in a phase where the entrepreneurial drive is outweighing that kind of thinking. So the entrepreneurial drive is saying, let me establish my own company, let me establish my own asset management entity. But I think ultimately we need to arrive at that point where we're saying, what are we trying to do? You know, how effectively are we competing with the large established asset managers if we are fragmented and there are 100 of us that only have 2 billion rand under management, you know, as opposed to 100 of us collectively having 20 billion rand under management, which is a far more powerful and compelling investment story for a pension fund.
Yeah.
So I guess we still have to get to that point, and it's not desirable for everyone, but from the perspective I'm looking at it from a pension fund or asset owner point of view, I think that would take us a long way forward.
Yeah, I guess we need to just stand together and work together to have more power in future in these retirement funds. Right, Linda, so I think I'm going to stop right there. Thank you so much for allowing us to have this chat with you today. It's been absolutely amazing and a breath of fresh air, you know. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the guests that joined today. There were about 120 participants that came in through today to listen to you. So it's been absolutely amazing. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone. And I really hope that you enjoy your evening. And Linda, I think we can engage more in future regarding ABSIP events and engagements.
Thank you so much. Look, I don't know who has to go, but I could spare a few more minutes given that I was interrupted for a while because I see other questions on the chat box. So I would like to address some of them. Perhaps we could go for another 10 minutes if you don't mind, 10, 15 minutes.
All right, that's fine then. So maybe, yeah, if anyone wants to stay behind, we can do a further 10 more minutes. Yeah, would appreciate that. Thanks, Linda.
Sure.
So that, all right, let me grapple another question.
So Nomonde, she's another one who's not allowed to ask me questions, but let's indulge her. How do you manage to hold your center in challenging times and in this current environment when more is required from professionals to think creatively to bring sustainable solutions? Hey, Nomonde. Look, I think this has been a time that requires us to go back to basics and go back to the things that really matter. So what are the things that matter right now? Right now, it's how do you ensure continuity in this very, very uncertain world if you are trying to run a business? And so one, that means empower people to work remotely. Some organizations have been able to do that for many years, but some, it's actually very new for them. It was new for us. We literally got MS 365 or whatever it is at the beginning of the year. We learned to do Teams in February and the lockdown began in March. So, you know, we were not geared for it and we had to adapt very, very quickly. And it took a few interventions to get everybody up to speed and able to log in remotely from wherever we were. But it also took a little bit of a culture shift where you're saying to some managers who have managed people in the very traditional way of, I must see you at the office and I must look over your shoulder and make sure you're doing your work. It took a massive shift to say, I must trust that you're doing what's required of you, and I must trust that you are professional enough to manage yourself. And some people had never had to manage themselves. They had been managed by someone else for such a long time. So how do I manage to hold my center among all of those challenges? Some days it's easy, some days it's not. I think a focus on the things that matter always helps a lot. So in the flurry of things that come up and panicking about this and that, a return to, okay, what really, really matters? What do I need? Not what do I want, what does somebody else want? What absolutely needs to be done today? At times it is the thing that's needed to kind of hold the center. And are we looking at converting the funds from DB to DC? Nxolisi, I think we could contemplate that for new members coming into the fund. For existing members, I think, let me tell the truth. There are people who are staying at Eskom right now because they know they have a DB fund, and when they retire, they'll be looked after and looked after very well. So to introduce to them the notion of a DC fund, it wouldn't be popular. But what we could do is close to new members. And then for new members coming in, which typically are younger people who are more dynamic and they like the flexibility of a DC fund, that's something we could do. And we've been contemplating it now for a while. Snare, top 3 things that, key pieces of advice that I would give women who are aspiring to run entities or businesses. You overestimate me, Snare. One though, I would say it must be something that resonates with your values as an individual, such that you can stay motivated even through the tough times. So if it's something that you really want in your heart and you feel that you are convinced it's something that the market needs, that will go a long way towards keeping you motivated even through the tough times. And then the second thing, in particular for women, would be a support system. You know, your mentors, your sponsors, and also, I guess, on the home front, if you are someone who has children or other responsibilities in the home, you need to know that someone will feed your children when you're not able to be there while you're out with clients or potential clients. So those are the top three things. I would say it's your passion, it's what drives you, it's your support system, it's also yeah. So let me go to the next one. EPPF invests in a wide variety of assets. How much of the funding goes towards developing economies in the places where your members live? Okay, probably not enough, I must admit, Maurice. I do think we have a portfolio that's set aside for developmental impact investments. And within that portfolio, one of our targets is to invest in the underserved regions of our economy. So we all know the rural and the peri-urban areas typically don't enjoy the same access to services and resources that urban areas have. So within that, we do try to reach those type of developing economies. I think Zanele is on this call. So Zanele, you heard that loud and clear. Zanele is our developmental impacts portfolio manager. What can government do to crowd in private investments? Yeah. Value for money. Look. What matters the most is governance and transparency. So if government is trying to crowd in private investments, they have to give us the assurance that we're going to make our money back, first of all, and we are not throwing our money into a black hole where we will never see what happens with it. So I think transparency, governance, for government to crowd in, and government has to de-risk some of the investments. You know, it's not the job of pension funds to provide sanitation to the masses. Government promised to do that. So government must deliver on that. We can come in to the extent that there are viable projects that will offer us an investment return, a good risk-adjusted investment return, but government must do its job. And the success factor, I suppose, is blended finance, where we come in where projects have been de-risked sufficiently. I don't know, Isaiah, what is Linda's opinion on how far we are on these? I don't know what these are. Zanele, yes, please. What's yes, please? And with all the increasing requirements for asset managers to provide comprehensive reporting on ESG and impact measurement, how do I think BE managers will survive under those increasing demands? How could there not be a better way to enable them? Yeah, look, it does place an additional governance budget on resources that are already quite thinly stretched. So we do need to think about ways in which we can approach that. And I think a collaborative approach maybe is the way to go, where through our pooling of resources, we can achieve those kind of synergies. But I haven't figured it out just yet, and I would welcome an opportunity to discuss it with you. Okay, Lumka, hi Lumka. What sectors would I say are attractive to me as an investor in this new normal? Technology, pharmaceuticals, and I think services to consumers. So, you know, we are working from home. We are under a lot of pressure. Some people are having to teach their children and still deliver on their jobs. And as much as we're working from home, we don't have much time. So for those people who don't have time, I think there's a definite need for convenience services. So those people who will deliver your groceries at home, those people who will do your random tasks, I think that's an industry that's waiting to explode in South Africa, because, you know, we just so stretched for time. So pharmaceuticals, tech, and convenience industry. And I think that's all the questions that I could see, Prudence. I don't know if there were some that I missed earlier.
I think we've answered most of it. Yeah, so I think we'll end it there for now. And if there are any more questions, then I can certainly pass them down to you. But thank you very much for allowing us more time with you and being on this platform with you as well. You're very, very graceful, and you're just a breath of fresh air. So thank you so much for having this chat with us this evening.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
It's been absolutely amazing, Linda. Thanks to everyone that joined us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye. Cheers, everyone. You too. Thanks, Prudence.